is this a single piece of art or is it 200 pieces of art? And in the case of, the single cell grid where you have the single signature versus the cell of eight where you have 64 signatures there, to me, there's just something interesting about figuring out people's preference or taste among those things too.
Hello and welcome to the AOI Masterclasses for the Velocity series by Red Bull Racing and Bybit. In this episode, Jack Butcher, the fourth artist of the Velocity series, will tell us everything about his new collections, Trademark and Signature. Welcome everyone to a new masterclass by AOI for the Velocity series with Red Bull Racing and Bybit. We're here today with Jack Butcher, the fourth artist of this project. Hi Jack, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for being with us. So let's start this conversation. I would love to know, what was it about this collaboration that resonated with your artistic journey when you were first approached with it?
So I'm a huge car enthusiast, have been for as long as I can remember. My first word was car, actually. I got that confirmation of that a couple of weeks ago. My mom told me. I worked in advertising about 5 or 6 years ago, and like my dream client, I managed to work my dream client, one of my favorite brands in the world in automotive. And yeah, ever since getting started on the visualized value art journey, like motorsport, automotive, all of those things that I spent so much of my life obsessed with, just having an opportunity to create something inspired by that with, a entity that competes at the highest level is very exciting. So I jumped at the opportunity.
That's incredible. And we love to have you as the fourth artist. It's such an honor as well. So what is it that inspired you to jump into the kind of generative art scene, especially working with art blocks for the first time on the art blocks engine, for this project specifically?
So art blocks, a number of reasons. Like I've always admired art blocks as a platform and everybody that's contributed to that. Eric, obviously a massive inspiration and now mentor and friend, and also an honor to contribute alongside him in this series. One of the reasons is just to sort of push myself into a new medium of sorts, work with something that I haven't worked with before. And there are a lot of things I think about this project, this idea, this like overlap that make a generative piece feel like the answer, or at least like an interesting commentary on what happens in racing, motorsport. Like there's so much randomness, and the idea of every moment being this unique thing, or every race being this unique thing, feels to me like responding to that with a set of constraints, or developing something that can handle randomness and produce something beautiful as a product of randomness is very a very seductive problem to solve, and a lot of fun to like put myself in a position of working with something that I hadn't worked with before, which admittedly in hindsight I maybe bit off a little bit more than I could chew when I started, but I learned a ton in the last, I don't even know how long it's been, 6 weeks or something. And yeah, very proud of where we ended up, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And behind the scenes, we were able to see kind of your process throughout these weeks. But tell us a little bit about your inspirations when you first started to work on the two collections.
So the signature series, so the concentric circle piece, that was something that actually I've had in my mind for maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years at this point. This was something that I wanted to do in, I don't know, 2016, 17 with a real car. And there's so many the ability to do that physically is very difficult, right? Like to actually create these the idea I had was to do that with remote control cars. So I put these cars on a canvas and spin them, put paint on them somehow, and transfer the mark from the car to the canvas, and then create these individual compositions based on that. And the thing about that is, like, there's so many variables that you can't really get anything. You can't get something that feels unified from that. At least I couldn't figure it out at the time. But I always wanted to do this thing that felt like captured this, car as a, if the track or the surface is the canvas, the car is the paintbrush, or the car is the tool, the instrument, um the the driver is the artist. And I had a couple experiences when I was working in those environments where I would get to like ride shotgun on a hot lap with some of these drivers, and it like the level of talent and the things that you kind of thought possible before you get in the car and afterwards are just completely shattered. So I just had this massive newfound respect for people who do that for a living. And yeah, working with this brand back almost a decade ago now, always wanted to try and find ways to make that, artfully represent that, but not not just by taking photos of the car itself, right? There's like there's just endless ways to use the car as a subject matter, but this is a different take on that, where you're using the output of the car as a subject matter, the marks that it leaves. So that's a lot of the inspiration there. And there's some like geometric inspiration taken from a couple of other projects I worked on this year, the grid format. And the randomization that art blocks can throw into that gives us this like varied collection, but they do feel very, very unified. Like that collection specifically is like super tight, small run, and those prints are all going to feel like a very cohesive set of pieces. And then the trademark piece is also inspired by, and well, the inspiration for that comes a lot from like the racing environment specifically, where you have all of these different entities working together to make this thing happen. Like if you look at the livery of an F1 car, there's like 60 logos on that thing. There's obviously a massive amount of people behind the car working to support the thing, make it happen. And that aesthetic is, somehow they pulled it off, where it's like this super elegant, as far as sports go, F1 does have this like incredibly high-end luxury feel to it, but it's also, there's this really interesting paradox or contrast where there's just logos and branding everywhere, which in most situations is kind of the inverse. Like there's, to do that elegantly is very difficult. And the registered trademark symbol is like an abstraction of that idea of these like entities that operate in one area normally coming together to make this thing happen on a weekly basis during the F1 season. So there's a little bit of that idea there of like these infinite number of combinations of people and talent, the really high contrast, bright, fluorescent, almost random color palette. And what else was I gonna add in there? Those are a couple of the main themes in there. There's also this implied like metric reference in there too. They come out, some of them look like different measurements of numbers, data, this organic input or this random input that becomes a representation of a set of numbers or performance or debt. So there's a lot of different themes in there, but I think the underlying thing is this like real tension between collaboration and competition in that environment. And I took a lot of inspiration from, get into this with visuals more so, but from some of the more So more notable collections on art blocks. Squiggles, for example, is this like the ability to create that amount of variation across 10,000? Like, find the one thing that I really appreciate about art blocks specifically, and even I found myself experiencing this when I was going through Snowfro's last release, is the degree to which one piece resonates with you over the next is massive. Like the difference in your personal taste across these pieces is such a bizarre thing to experience. You would imagine like it wouldn't vary that much, but you have, or I had really strong preferences for one over the other. So trying to work with that too, and even reference that idea of people have these affiliations for colors, companies, brands based on things that, you know, are almost unknown to you. You kind of inherit them, or they're just part of your identity at a certain point. So there's also a reference to that in the trademark piece too. And one more thing I would say, like in the language, trademark and signature are referring to, like, on the surface, they're these terms that you use to refer to the symbol, but trademark is like the mark of a person whose trade is driving, is this, you know, the data they leave on the track or the literal tire marks they leave on the asphalt. So they're both playing off that idea of car as instrument to produce uniqueness and art in many ways.
Amazing. Yeah, let's stay on trademark because looking at the behind the scenes while you're creating the trademark algorithm, I remember that it looked quite different a couple of weeks ago, and then you worked on it more. So I don't know if you've got something to show us of that process of how it has changed and how you got to that final product.
Yeah, let me show you. So we started at here. Let me show you. So this is a lot of the genesis of the idea, and I actually was playing with this idea a couple months ago, and I wouldn't say shelved it. It was like just waiting for the right context to present it again. And I built this algorithm that was creating these different outputs, all based on this, you know, this blend between two trademark symbols. So that implied collaboration in that single thing, and then all of these random outputs. And just kept looking at this. I feel like it was in a decent place, and I just kept going through it, going through the outputs, look again, look again, look again. And I was like, it doesn't feel as unified as it could. I think it feels like it definitely, they come out of the same universe, but there's something, again, a nod to Squiggles, is there's something about, you could see that in monotone, in black or white. You could take all of the information out of it, basically, except for the most basic outline, and you would recognize it as part of that collection. And then thinking about trademark as a statement, if you almost put that requirement into this, where every piece needs to feel like a different version of that trademark. So every iteration of it is unique, but they all fit in this same family. I would say this is like 90% there, but not quite. So I took these, I'll just pull these out. This set of pieces here was where I really started to focus on. There's another reference in here that I think helped me make this decision, is this idea of DNA sequencing. So if you've ever seen those images of sequenced DNA, where you have all of the different molecules. I'm not a scientist, so I might be referring to that wrong, but they're all marked by color, and every single, if you took a sample from anywhere, it would be completely unique. And there was something about this that reminded me of that, which is also this extra layer of meaning on each of these unique moments, right? Every single one is the same but different. They have this completely unique output, but they're all made up of the same underlying things. So I really focused in on this, and then started to think about ways to add further uniqueness into this configuration. So there's now, if I share a different screen, there's now a much more, so this is the actual Art Blocks Explorer with the final algorithm. They all kind of follow this. They're all compositions within a canvas as opposed to the whole canvas too. So they have they are trademarks themselves, as opposed to in the piece I showed you before, some of them were just like snapshots of the, a close up of a composition. So trying to make them their own little things, and added a lot of different variables in here that we can't see the metadata on the preview, but there are different ways in which the grid configures itself. There are different widths at which the symbols are displayed. There are different line weights, and the input colors are actually completely random. So there are infinite numbers of colors that can be composed here, and then there are all these random variables that they get interpreted through and produce these unique outputs. So it's actually a really fascinating mental exercise to think about how to configure these variables that are going to produce things that you would approve the aesthetic of infinitely. So it really gave me a huge appreciation for work that I already was a fan of, but just thinking through the degree to which you have to think of all these different variables, and also when to stop. Like there's a huge that you could just take this, you go forever and ever and ever. And I think you lose something in even taking it too far. So like having the restraint to stop where that everything that comes out of this is part of this collection. And I think there's like a really delicate balance there. And I think you can kind of get distracted or seduced by this idea of traits or rarity, where you're trying to create things that are really, really visually distinct, but don't necessarily feel as coherent with the entire collection. So this is definitely aesthetic first, and then I think there are 8 different variables underneath this that each have 8 traits, and they each have, some have 3 or 4 different iterations within them, and then some of them are infinite number of inputs, like the colors and the gradients. And I think we're able to achieve the harmony in the color because we're using this screen blending, and the high contrast on black really feels like a part of that F1 aesthetic too, where you just have like super high contrast, like punchy colors that are competing for attention on this ridiculously crowded stage. So this is where we landed. I'm just incredibly glad to have got it to a point where I feel like you could press this button a million times and every single thing that comes out is going to feel like part of this system.
Yeah, it was definitely awesome to see the progress in the last few weeks and how this has, come up to the final artworks is really amazing. And talking about how you kind of see this as very much connected to the F1 aesthetic or the F1 world. There's also something important about this drop, which is that the time of the mint is going to be very, very short, for 23 minutes, around 23 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So how was that approach for you? Like, how did you come up with the idea? What do you think it was important to put that on?
I think there's an obvious reference to speed in there of this sport is obviously high speed, and we like arrived at this place where we're making a reference to the cumulative fastest lap times of Red Bull from last season. So I think it's 23 minutes and change. And also just having the size of the release be determined by people who are participating at that time is very similar to the result of a race, right? It's this connected experience that the people who are participating are determining the outcome versus we decide on an arbitrary variable up front, and then it either hits that or it doesn't. So I think there's something about that adds to the provenance of the collection, in that everybody who participates is determining the size of the collection from the beginning. And we'll see where it ends up.
Yeah, totally. And then also, talking about this idea of collaboration, right? In your previous recent collections, you've had a lot of this sort of social contract with your collectors. We really want them to engage with the artworks and do something with it. So now that this is a generative series and you've got, this very limited amount of time, how do you think that people will, engage with the collection during the 23 minutes, but also after?
Well, one thing I hope, and I think is already starting to happen on Twitter, is this idea of the symbol itself being this very high context reference to the way the world functions now, right? Like the registered trademark has so much embedded context, and there's this very like ironic tension in using it, because the things that it is attached to normally you would have to ask permission to use, right? Like the logo of X plus the R symbol, but you could just take the R symbol. Nobody owns that thing. It's just a symbol that we collectively have decided marks the protection of IP. And that's what all of the collections I've released this year have had in common, is they are remixable by design, and the base layer symbolism or the base layer philosophy is that idea. It's not you come up with something and you ask people to remix it. It's like the fundamental rationale for the project is these are things that this is a reference to the things that you're not supposed to be allowed to remix. But if you just tweak the context slightly, it becomes this device where everybody can express themselves through this thing. So the check mark, I think, has that quality for sure, and in the very social context. And why I'm excited about this is like almost an evolution of that idea, or like a parallel version of that idea that talks about the way these huge events function. And we'll see how it plays out, but I've already seen people kind of pick up on this registered trademark symbol as something that you can use to carry a lot of context into a new piece of work. So hopefully we'll see a bunch more of that. And if you're watching this, please go run with it and make some stuff.
Amazing. All right, now let's move to signature a little bit more. We'd love to see, well, we talked a little bit already about the process, but you were mentioning before how, there's kind of an importance in the tire marks and what they signify for drivers, right? So I would love to know if you find some resonance to your career and what you feel like you've been leaving behind, or what you've been so far showing with your tire marks, in a sense. What is this? What is the connection in the concept and your career?
So I will say, let me just share this image first. So one of the most interesting parts of this symbol to me is the contrast between how a driver or a team or a season functions up to this point. very orderly, like every single, every single turn, every single decision that is made cumulatively is so precise, so calculated. And this is kind of the moment of release after all of that. So the end of a perfect race, you're doing this, which is a very, in quotation marks, imperfect or organic thing. So there's this great contrast between this great contrast between chaos and order, which again is like why I love art blocks and why I love this idea of randomness informing these outputs that are constrained by some decisions that you've made as an artist. And the composition is playing with that idea too. You have all this chaos and randomness, but it's all contained within these very rigid and predetermined grid format. So every single piece is completely unique, but they all have these parameters within which they operate. So that, there's just something, I think, something powerful about drawing attention to that contrast, and that icon, that symbol of the burnout is universally recognized as having a relationship to victory in motorsport. And there's something incredibly elegant about it when you isolate it too. You just have these very organic shapes. There's also, this is not specific, and this is not a specific reference to my career, but actually Red Bull as a brand, all my entire advertising career, I would always reference the work that Red Bull did with motorsports, with extreme sports, in all of these contexts, that they would produce content that was so far ahead of everybody else. And like they were a media brand, like way before this thing caught on. And even operating an F1 team like that, in 99% of cases, is a car manufacturer. And for Red Bull, that is not the case. And I've always just pitch decks that I used to go and present to clients, like, this, look, see this latest thing that Red Bull did. And majority of the times people just look at you and like, yeah, we're not going to do that. It's just, there's no way we're going to get that signed off. I think there's some, I'm not saying we're like jumping off mountains or anything here, but there's a parallel to what's happening here too, with their foray into at least a nascent art and technology world too. So yeah, it's just I think there's something about that encapsulates their attitude too. And a lot of there was some specific videos that I watched. I think this is probably maybe 5 or 10 years ago. They did this where they would take the Red Bull F1 cars. I think there was one they drove through the Lincoln Tunnel in New York, and like shut down New York at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then we're doing burnouts on Broadway in New York. And there's just something about, that symbol that even extends beyond F1, but it's like the attitude with which you, make your presence known in the world. So I think there's a nice reference there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like something else to ask you about as well is, in your previous collections, there's always some sort of social meaning that you're trying to deconstruct, and you always try to make people ask themselves questions about the meaning of the things that we know about. So I'm curious to know, like, what kind of questions do you hope people ask themselves when they look at Signature and they look at the collection and there's 200 pieces only? What's the kind of questions that you wish to evoke in the collectors and the audience in general?
Well, one of the things with Signature specifically is this idea of, is this a single piece of art, or is it 200 pieces of art? And in the case of, the single cell grid, where you have the single signature versus the cell of 8 where you have 64 signatures there. To me, there's just something interesting about figuring out people's preference or taste among those things too. So there's like, I'm even trying to figure out which one resonates most with me. I think like the middle ground there is my aesthetic preference, but there's this for people that have been familiar with the work from this year. There's some very nuanced mechanics in the scale of the grid in the checks collection, which is similar here, where you have the most unique piece by technical definition would be the 8x8 grid. So there's the most unique marks on paper, and the least unique, again, technically, is the 1x1, where you have the single burnout in this instance. And yeah, just trying to figure out, or trying to allow that preference to emerge naturally and as a product of the art blocks randomness is just going to be interesting to see how that plays out. There's also the way in which something like this could translate to the physical world too is very fascinating. The ability to take this randomness and put it back through a machine that can reproduce it on paper or on a physical surface is something that's also interesting to me. Like you're using something very precise to generate something random, and it's in reference to this thing that's happening in the real world, and then you have to add another step to get it back into the real world. So that's all stuff that I hope to explore with this. But there's another layer in this signature collection, which is the cumulative count of the circumferences of all of the circles on the composition. So in the bottom right of every single signature composition, there is that number which totals the amount of rubber burn in inverted commas in those single cumulatively across the composition. So another reference to, like, you could sort of organize them by density too. So you're adding this layer of data where I want to see from the least amount to the most amount of density organized. And there's just there's something about like you reverse engineer data from the art as opposed to, the way this normally operates, where the data informs the art. In this case, the art is making the data.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And I would love to, I love to see what you're going to come up next after this project. Like, do you have something already in mind? Like, has the Velocity series somehow inspired you for a new type of collection?
For sure, the way in which I've had to think about these, in the case of Trademark, high quantity output generative algorithm, there's so many, like, that's unlocked a lot of it's unlocked a lot of things that I just didn't like, just like planes of thinking that until you can use that tool, or until you see the outputs and have this like back and forth dialogue with the platform, you don't really, you're not completely aware of what's possible. So I have this other idea that I think I'm hoping to get out in the coming months that was directly inspired by using the Art Blocks platform and just thinking about this idea of algorithms. So yeah, it's been a huge unlock creatively. And yeah, I imagine the work I do in the future will be obviously everything is a cumulative process when you're learning to do new things, but this has been a great experience in like pushing myself to operate in a new medium.
That's incredible, and it's amazing to hear that, because one of the goals of the Velocity series for the artists is really to create something new, and for them to really push their boundaries and learn about new mediums, and just influence your career path in a sense. So it's such an honor to hear that from you. So yeah, that's great. That's everything for the masterclass today. Jack, would you like to add something else before we remind everyone about the drops?
No, I just thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting the work and engaging with it. And I feel very fortunate to get to do this for a living. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so for everyone who's watching, the drop is on Wednesday, 22nd at 2 p.m. UTC. Don't miss it. And make sure you engage with it, interact with it after this masterclass. We hope that you've got some knowledge about how to engage with the collections. We can't wait to see what you will come up with it. And thanks again, Jack. It was an honor to have you, and thank you for taking the time. And yeah, see you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the AOI streams. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and subscribe to listen to more stories from the pioneers of the ecosystem.